A stranger carries an old man's bags at the market. But what the man said at the end made the crowd freeze. People often believe they know what a day will bring. A routine market trip, a cup of coffee, a predictable afternoon. But sometimes, fate pulls a thread, unraveling a moment so quietly yet so powerfully that it leaves everyone breathless. That's what happened on a gray afternoon in a market square that smelled of oranges, old wood, and rain-soaked stone. Jacob was the kind of man most people didn't see anymore. His back was slightly hunched, skin weathered like sun-bleached leather, eyes soft with stories no one asked about. He wore a tattered brown coat that had once belonged to his father and carried 2 heavy leather bags filled with odds and simple things, but the world to him. The market was alive with the usual chaos, vendors shouting prices, children chasing each other, and townsfolk busy with their lives. No one noticed the old man struggling. No one except one. A young man, no older than 25, leaning against a lamppost with a backpack slung over one shoulder, watched as Jacob shuffled through the crowd. He had the kind of face you couldn't quite place, not classically handsome, not forgettable either. There was something in his eyes, though, something restless. His name was Ethan. And for reasons he didn't fully understand, his feet started moving before his brain could argue. He cut through the throng, past a woman selling sunflowers and a boy with a wooden flute, until he reached the old man. "Sir," Ethan said, his voice careful, "let me carry those for you." Jacob stopped, startled. It had been years since anyone called him sir. Years since anyone addressed him at all. The old man looked up, peering through the fine mist beginning to fall from the low clouds. His eyes were impossibly blue, like river glass, framed by countless wrinkles. "I appreciate it, son," Jacob said softly, his voice a gentle rasp. He hesitated, clutching the worn straps of his bags like they were the last threads tying him to the earth. Ethan reached out, and slowly, Jacob surrendered the bags. In the seconds it took for their hands to brush, something unspoken passed between them. A kind of recognition neither could name. The marketplace seemed to quiet, the shouts and footsteps muffling like a soundless wave had passed through. A few people noticed a fruit seller paused mid-call. A little girl tugged her mother's skirt and pointed. They walked in silence for a while, the old man's steps lighter without the burden, though he still moved cautiously, his body betraying decades of wear. "You live nearby, sir?" Ethan asked, more to fill the quiet than from real curiosity. Jacob smiled faintly. "Used to. Not much of a home now." The words landed heavier than either expected. Ethan glanced at the old man, uncertain whether to push or leave it alone. "Family," Ethan ventured. Jacob shook his head. "Gone. Long ago." The rain thickened, mist turning into a soft drizzle. People began to pull their coats tighter, stalls closing one by one. Ethan adjusted the bags in his hand. They were heavier than he expected, not with weight, but with history. Inside one was a faded photograph of a woman holding a baby, a small wooden carving of a bird, and a worn book with pages brittle as autumn leaves. They reached the edge of the market where an old stone bench sat beneath a skeletal tree. Jacob motioned to it, and they sat. For a moment, they simply listened to the rain. Then, as if releasing a held breath, Jacob spoke. "I fought in a war before you were born," he began. "Lost my wife 2 winters after I came home. Buried my son on a cold December morning." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "I come here every week," Jacob continued, "not because I need to, but because it reminds me of what people forget too easily, that a kind word and a strong hand can mean more than a man's fortune." He turned his eyes to Ethan, the weight of lifetimes in his gaze. "Most folks walk by. They always do." The young man struggled to find his voice. "I don't know why I stopped. I just—" Jacob placed a hand on his arm, thin fingers surprisingly steady. "You remembered to see," he said simply. A small crowd had gathered now, sensing something unusual but not knowing why. Vendors and shoppers drawn by that invisible pull humans feel when the world momentarily forgets to spin on its usual axis. A middle-aged woman with a basket of apples. A boy with a wet jacket. An old man with a cane. Ethan noticed them and shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't good with attention. But Jacob, he sat straighter, a quiet dignity radiating from him. "Let me tell you something," Jacob said, raising his voice just enough for those nearby to hear, though it sounded more like a story than a speech. "When I was young, a stranger once did the same for me. Carried my burden when I was too proud to ask. He told me something I never forgot." The market was silent now, raindrops drumming against cobblestones. Breath held. Jacob's lips curved into a faint, wistful smile. He said, We don't carry things for others because they can't. We do it because it reminds us we're still human. There was a beat, a heartbeat between seconds. Then the old man stood, slower than before but steady, and took his bags back from Ethan's hands. The crowd remained frozen, unsure what to do, unwilling to break whatever strange magic hung in the air. Jacob tipped his head to Ethan. "Thank you, son." And with that, he walked away, disappearing into the drizzle, leaving a hush in his wake. No one moved for a long time. It wasn't until a vendor coughed awkwardly and someone dropped a coin that the world started to move again. But it wasn't quite the same. Ethan remained seated, rain clinging to his hair and jacket, his pulse still racing. A man with no home, no family, and too many ghosts had just given him something rare, a moment of truth. The kind that settled deep in the marrow and changed things quietly. And though no one said it aloud, everyone who witnessed it felt it. The invisible thread between people that life frays and neglects had just been tugged taut again. The rain slowed to a misty whisper, leaving behind puddles that caught the gray light like broken mirrors. The crowd that had gathered began to drift away, each person moving on, but not quite the same as they were before. Ethan remained seated on the stone bench, the damp seeping into his jeans, the cold gnawing at his fingertips. Yet he hardly noticed. His mind was racing, chasing after the old man's words like a dog after a sin it couldn't place. We do it because it reminds us we're still human. Why had those words hit so hard? He thought about his own father, a man of few words and too many regrets, long gone from his life. About his mother, working 2 jobs to keep them afloat after the divorce, and how he left town the moment he turned 18, chasing a kind of freedom he still hadn't found. And here, a stranger with a voice like sandpaper and a story heavier than the sky had just given him something his own blood never had, a reminder of what mattered. "Hey." A voice snapped Ethan from his thoughts. It belonged to a woman, maybe late 20s, soaked hair plastered to her face. She held a camera slung over one shoulder and a notebook tucked beneath her arm. "I saw what you did back there," she said, her tone a strange mix of curiosity and reverence. "That was something." Ethan shrugged, unsure what to say. "Wasn't a big deal." "It was to him," she countered, sitting beside him without invitation. "And to everyone else." She extended a hand. "Ava." He took it, feeling the cold dampness of her skin. "Ethan." Ava smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm a freelance journalist. Human stories, mostly. People don't talk to each other anymore. Not really. I try to catch the rare moments they do." Ethan chuckled softly. "I'm not much of a story." "You are now," she said. "Do you know him?" "The old man." He shook his head. "Never seen him before." Ava's brow furrowed. "I have. Couple of times, years back. Always here. Same coat, same bags. People call him Old Jacob, though I doubt that's his real name." Ethan looked toward the direction Jacob had disappeared, a growing knot in his stomach. "He's homeless." Ava tilted her head. "Not exactly. Some say he's got a place out past the hills. Others swear he sleeps right here, under the awning of the bakery. No one knows for sure." For reasons he couldn't name, Ethan felt a pang of worry. "I should check on him," he muttered. Ava smiled again, softer this time. "Yeah, you should." They stood together, and Ethan felt something shift. The rain had washed the market clean, leaving behind a quiet that felt different than before. The world, he thought, had tilted a fraction. As they moved through the now deserted stalls, Ethan realized he didn't even know where to begin. Jacob had vanished like smoke, leaving only the weight of his words behind. Ava walked beside him, the steady tap of her boots on the wet stone keeping rhythm with his pulse. "You know," she said after a while, "my dad used to tell me that the universe throws people into your path when you need them most. Not when you're ready. Not when it's convenient. Just when you need them." Ethan glanced at her. "You think I needed him?" "I think maybe we all did." They rounded the corner past the bakery, its windows fogged from the heat inside. Ethan scanned the narrow alleys and storefronts, but there was no sign of the old man, only puddles and shadows. Then, from somewhere ahead, the faintest sound a cough, rough and wet. Ethan quickened his pace, heart thudding against his ribs. In a narrow alcove between 2 shuttered shops, Jacob sat slumped against the wall. His bags rested by his side, the rain darkening the stones around him. "Jacob," Ethan called softly, kneeling beside him. The old man's eyes fluttered open, a faint flicker of recognition passing over his features. "Told you not to worry about me," he rasped. "You didn't tell me where you were going." Ethan said, his voice thick. Ava crouched nearby, her expression unreadable. Jacob coughed, a deep, ragged sound. Rain gets in the bones these days. Harder to keep warm. Ethan hesitated. Do you have somewhere to stay? The old man smiled faintly. Got everywhere and nowhere. Been that way a long time. Ethan exchanged a glance with Ava, who gave a subtle nod. Come on, Ethan said. There's a cafe a block over. Let's get you dry. Jacob started to protest, but the weariness in his body betrayed him. With surprising gentleness, Ethan helped him to his feet. Ava grabbed one of the bags. They moved slowly, Jacob leaning heavily on Ethan's arm. The cafe was small, tucked into the corner of an old brick building, its windows glowing amber against the wet gray world. Inside, warmth hit them like a wave. The scent of coffee and fresh bread filled the air. The owner, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard, eyed them warily as they entered, but Ava stepped forward. Put it on my tab, Mike, she said, and the man grunted his approval. They settled into a booth in the corner. Jacob sagged against the cushion, his face pale but eyes still sharp. Ava disappeared to order while Ethan rubbed his damp hands together, unsure how to fill the silence. You didn't have to, Jacob murmured. I know, Ethan replied. I wanted to. A ghost of a smile passed over the old man's face. Good heart, boy. Rare thing. Ava returned with a tray 3 steaming mugs and a plate of warm pastries. They ate in silence for a while. Jacob's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the cup, but he managed a sip. So, Ava ventured after a moment, notebook in hand. You've seen a lot, haven't you? Jacob chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. Too much, and not enough. Ava leaned in. Would you tell us about it? Ethan expected the old man to refuse. Instead, Jacob's gaze drifted to the window, watching the rain trace crooked paths down the glass. I was 17 when I left home, he began softly. Ran away with a girl named May. We thought the world was waiting for us. Turns out, the world don't wait for anyone. He told them about the war, how he lied about his age to enlist, how he'd seen friends fall, faces he still carried in the corners of his mind. About coming home to a country that no longer made sense. About May waiting for him with a newborn he'd never met. I didn't stay long, Jacob admitted, shame flickering in his voice. Couldn't bear the weight of it. The ghosts, you know. Ethan nodded. He knew. He spoke of jobs lost, towns passed through, kindnesses given and taken, a life spent more on the road than in any place you could point to on a map. And then he told them about the stranger. I was 23, Jacob said. Cold night. No food. Nowhere to go. Sat on a bench outside a church. Thought I'd slip away quietly. Ava held her breath. Then this man sits down beside me. Big fellow. Never got his name. Just gave me half his sandwich and said, You're not done yet. Jacob's voice faltered. Told me to pass it along someday. And I promised I would. He looked at Ethan now. Yes, today was the day. A hush settled over the table. Ethan swallowed hard. I don't know what to say. You already said it, Jacob replied. When you stopped? Ava closed her notebook gently. Would you let me write about you? About this. Jacob considered it, then shrugged. If it'll make folks remember. Not about what matters. The door chimed as a gust of wind blew through, carrying with it the scent of wet earth. And in that moment, Ethan felt something old and heavy in his chest loosen. They stayed there a while longer, stories traded like currency. Jacob's past, Ava's travels, Ethan's restless search for something he hadn't known he'd been missing. When they finally left, the rain had stopped. The sky cracked open just enough to let a streak of pale light through. Ethan offered to walk Jacob to wherever he called home, but the old man declined. I'm good, son. Always was. He pressed something into Ethan's hand, a small wooden bird, whittled smooth with age. Keep it, Jacob said, so you don't forget. Ethan wanted to ask more, but Jacob was already moving away, steps slow but sure. And like before, he disappeared into the world as quietly as he'd entered it. The next morning, Ethan woke before the sun. The city outside his window was still wrapped in mist, the early light barely touching the edges of the skyline. He sat up in bed, the small wooden bird Jacob had given him resting on his nightstand. He picked it up, running his thumb along the smooth grain. There was something about the old man's words the night before that clung to him, refusing to let go. We do it because it reminds us we're still human. Ethan wasn't sure when the last time was that he felt anything like that. Most of his days blurred together a string of jobs, dates, nights lost to loud bars and faces he couldn't quite remember the next morning. But Jacob had cracked something open. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. "Ava, you up?" Ethan grinned. He hadn't given her his number, but she'd found it. He wasn't surprised. Ava seemed like the kind of person who always found what she was looking for. "Ethan, yeah. Ava, meet me at the market. 8 a.m. sharp." Ethan glanced at the clock. 7:23 a.m. He pulled on his jacket, shoved the little bird into his pocket, and headed out. The market looked different in the early light, quieter, softer. The stalls were half empty, vendors setting up for the day. The air smelled like damp earth and citrus. Ava waited by the fountain, camera in one hand, a coffee in the other. She lifted a brow when she saw him. "You're late." "It's 7:58. "Late," she repeated, but smiled. They fell into step together. "I checked with a few people," Ava said, getting right to it. "About Jacob." Ethan shot her a sideways glance. "You found something?" She nodded. "Nobody knows where he stays. No address. But get this, every few years, someone shows up claiming they met him. Same story, same coat, same bags, same line about carrying the weight of strangers." Ethan frowned. "Wait, what do you mean every few years?" "I mean," Ava said, stopping to face him, "people have stories about old Jacob going back decades." Ethan blinked. "But he'd be too old for it to be the same guy," Ava finished for him. "I know." She pulled a small leather-bound notebook from her bag and handed it to him. "Here. This was my grandfather's. He was a reporter too. Found it in my mom's attic." Ethan opened it. The pages yellowed and brittle. On one of them, a faded clipping from a newspaper dated 1972. "Stranger carries war veterans' bags through market." A black and white photo showed a young man beside an old, weathered figure in a long coat, their features blurred by time and ink. Beneath it, the caption read, "A mysterious figure known as Old Jacob has been a fixture of the market for as long as anyone can remember. His kindness and stories are the stuff of local legend." Ethan stared at it. "It can't be the same guy." "Unless it's not a person," Ava said quietly. "Unless it's a name. A role someone takes on." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "You think he's what?" "Some kind of tradition." "Maybe," Ava murmured. "Or maybe it's a man. The same man. Or a different one. But the message is what matters." Ethan closed the notebook. His mind reeled, trying to hold on to reason and losing his grip. "Come on," Ava said, tugging at his sleeve. "There's one more person I want you to meet." They crossed the market, Ava leading him down alleys and side streets Ethan had never noticed before. The city felt different this morning, older, somehow. As if behind the glass and steel of modern life, something ancient still breathed. They stopped at a tiny bookshop tucked between two crumbling brick buildings. The sign above the door read Crowley's Antiquarian. Inside, the place smelled of dust and cedar. Shelves sagged beneath the weight of old leather volumes. A bell chimed as they entered. An elderly woman looked up from behind the counter. Her hair was silver, piled high in a loose bun, and her eyes, sharp as glass, settled on Ava. "You're late." Ava grinned. "Good morning to you too, Ruth." The woman's gaze shifted to Ethan. She tilted her head, studying him. "So this is the one," Ruth said. "The boy with the old man's bird." Ethan stiffened. "How do you?" "Sit," Ruth said, gesturing to a pair of worn chairs by the fire. "I'll explain." They sat. Ruth disappeared into the back, returning a moment later with a faded box. She set it on the table, opened it, and inside were dozens of tiny wooden birds. All hand-carved, all unique. "These," Ruth began, "have been passed down through this city for as long as anyone remembers. No one knows who made the first one. Only that you get one when you meet him. And when you do, you carry the weight forward." Ethan frowned. "Wait." Ruth nodded. "Kindness. Memory. A promise. The world forgets too easy. Men like Jacob, whoever they are, remind us not to." She reached into the box and pulled out a bird almost identical to Ethan's. "This one," she said softly, "was my father's. 1946. He met old Jacob on a winter night, right after the war. Gave him half a loaf of bread and a coat. Got this in return." Ethan's throat tightened. Ruth looked at him. "You think you found him by accident?" "I don't believe in fate," Ethan murmured. "Doesn't matter what you believe," Ruth said. "The old man does." The fire crackled. "I need to find him," Ethan said. Ruth smiled faintly. "You will. When you're meant to." They left the bookshop as the sun finally broke through the clouds, light slanting over the city in long, warm beams. Ava walked beside him, quiet for a long while. "You okay?" she asked. I don't know, Ethan admitted. I feel like everything's heavier now. But clearer too. Ava nodded. Welcome to the wait. They parted ways at the edge of the market. Ethan pocketed both birds and started walking. His feet took him past the fountain, down narrow streets, past weathered churches and quiet courtyards. And then there he was. Jacob sat on a bench beneath an old oak, sunlight dappling the stones around him. He looked as if he'd been waiting. You took your time, the old man said. Ethan sat beside him. I've got questions. Jacob smiled. You always will. Ethan pulled the two birds from his pocket and set them on the bench between them. What is this, Jacob? Who are you? Jacob leaned back, looking at the sky. A reminder, he said, that one small kindness can outlive you. That stories matter. That you're not as alone as you think. He closed his eyes. And me? I'm just the one who keeps it moving. A lump formed in Ethan's throat. Why me? Jacob opened one eye, grinning. Why not you? They sat in silence for a while, the breeze lifting the leaves. And somewhere in the distance, a bell tolled. Days passed. Ethan went back to work. The newsroom buzzed with deadlines and breaking stories, but everything felt dull. He kept the wooden bird on his desk, and sometimes, when the phone stopped ringing and the printers fell silent, he'd catch himself staring at it. Ava called once. Found another name, she said. A man named Henry Carter. Claims he met old Jacob in 1981. Said it changed his life. Ethan agreed to meet him. Henry Carter lived in a modest house on the outskirts of the city. The man who opened the door was wiry and weathered, his eyes sharp behind thick glasses. You're looking for Jacob, he said without preamble. Ethan nodded. Henry led him inside, through a living room cluttered with books and photographs. On a small shelf by the window sat a bird smaller than Ethan's, but carved with the same careful hand. I was 24, Henry began, settling into a worn armchair. Lost my job. Drinking too much. Was ready to leave town. Figured nobody'd miss me. He smiled, a little sad. Then I ran into this old man, carrying 2 heavy bags through the snow. Nobody stopped for him, but something made me turn around. Henry chuckled softly. He gave me a sandwich, if you can believe it. Told me some story about a soldier who carried a stranger off a battlefield in France. Ethan leaned forward. What happened after? He left me this, Henry gestured to the bird. Told me to carry the weight, pass it on when it was time. I sobered up. Got a job at the shelter. Been there ever since. Ethan stared at the small wooden figure. You think he's real? The same man. Henry shrugged. Does it matter? The world's full of things we can't explain. Doesn't mean they don't change us. Outside, the sun hung low in the sky. Ethan left with a head full of questions and a sense of quiet dread. Because deep down, he knew what was coming. The next evening, the phone rang at the newsroom. A market vendor named Elsie. She'd seen the old man again, this time near the church on Alder Street. Ethan grabbed his jacket, ignoring his editor's protests, and ran. The streets were wet from an afternoon storm, reflections of neon signs shimmering in the puddles. The city felt different now, like it was holding its breath. When he reached Alder Street, the old man was there, sitting on the church steps. But something was wrong. Jacob looked smaller, his coat hanging off him like it was too big. His face was pale, and his hands trembled as he held a paper cup of coffee. Ethan approached. You all right? Jacob looked up, smiled faintly. Evening, son. Ethan crouched down beside him. You don't look so good. Been a long time, Jacob murmured. Not many left who remember the old ways. Ethan hesitated. Tell me what this is. Why me? Jacob studied him for a long moment. You're angry, the old man said softly. At the world. At yourself. Carrying your own weight so long you forgot you could set it down. Ethan's throat tightened. I used to be like you, Jacob went on. Worried the world owed me something. Then I met a man. Carried my bags when no one else would. Told me a story that saved my life. He took a shaking breath. Then it was my turn. Ethan's voice was raw. I don't know how to do this. You already are, Jacob smiled. The old man pressed something into Ethan's palm. A worn silver coin. The engraving faded, but the weight of it was undeniable. When the time comes, Jacob said, you'll know. Ethan closed his fingers around the coin. And when he looked up, Jacob was gone. No sound. No farewell. Just an empty step, a lingering scent of rain and old tobacco. Ethan stood, heart hammering. He didn't go home that night. He walked the streets, his city suddenly unfamiliar and ancient. He thought about his father long gone, a man he barely remembered, but whose absence had shaped every inch of his life. About the nights he'd spent numbing the ache, the people he'd brushed past without a second glance. And he thought about Ruth, about Henry, about the quiet chain stretching back through time, ordinary hands passing kindness like an inheritance. Near dawn, Ethan found himself by the old market fountain. A woman sat there, hunched and shivering in the chill. A worn coat, as too tired for someone so young. Ethan hesitated. Then he crossed the square. "Hey," he said gently. "You hungry?" The woman blinked, startled, then nodded. Ethan bought 2 sandwiches from a bakery just opening its shutters. Sat beside her while the city woke. They talked. About nothing and everything. About broken families and impossible debts. About old cities and places neither of them had seen. Before he left, Ethan reached into his pocket. The little wooden bird sat warm against his palm. He hesitated, then pressed it into her hand. "Carry it forward," he said. The woman stared at him, confusion and gratitude flickering in her eyes. Ethan smiled and walked away. Side story 2,000 words. They told me I wouldn't amount to anything. Teachers, neighbors, even my mother once whispered it in the thick dark of a bad night. People like us, she slurred, fingers tight around a glass. We're ghosts before we're dead. I believed it for a long time. Then one winter morning, 20 years ago, I met a man in a long, tattered coat who changed everything. My name is Grace, and this is how I remember him. I was 17, hungry in every sense of the word. For food, for escape, for a different life than the one written out for me in peeling paint and empty cabinets. The market was barely open, fog curling between the stalls. I walked the same path I always did past the bakery I couldn't afford, the fruit stand where old Mr. Patel would sometimes slip me an apple. I kept my head down. That morning, I saw him. He was sitting by the fountain. Same as every day, I guess, though I hadn't noticed before. A thin man, skin like worn paper, coat too big for his frame. He had these eyes sharp, restless, like he was always chasing some invisible horizon. His bags were at his feet, heavy-looking, canvas faded to the color of old bones. I wasn't planning to stop, but as I passed, one of his bags tipped over, and a scattering of tiny, hand-carved birds spilled out. I hesitated, then cursed myself for caring and crouched down, gathering them up. They were beautiful in a rough, imperfect way, each one a little different. A wing chipped here, a crooked beak there. He watched me, silent. I stacked them back into the bag. "Thank you," he rasped. I nodded, about to move on. "You got somewhere to be, Grace?" My stomach dropped. How did he know my name? I stared at him. I started. He smiled, slow and sad. "Everyone's running from something. You look like someone chasing ghosts." I didn't answer. My throat felt thick. "Sit," he said, patting the stone bench beside him. I should have walked away. But something about the cold in the air, the quiet of the street, and the way he spoke like he already knew the things I was too scared to say made me stay. I sat. He handed me a sandwich. Not much. A heel of bread, some dry cheese. It might as well have been a feast. I ate in silence, and he watched the fog. After a while, he spoke. "World's awake, girl. Too many people carry it alone. Breaks their back before their spirit." I didn't know what to say. He pulled something from his pocket. A small wooden bird. The same as the others, but older, worn smooth from years of touch. Once, someone carried my weight when I couldn't. Told me to pass it forward. He pressed the bird into my palm. "You look like someone who'll need this." I stared at it. "Why me?" He smiled again. "Why not you?" I remember my hand shaking as I closed my fingers around it. "Promise me something," he said. I swallowed hard. "What?" "When you see someone drowning, don't look away." I nodded. I don't know why. He tipped his head back and sighed, like some ancient burden had slipped off his shoulders. And when I looked down at the bird again, he was gone. No sound. No footsteps. Just vanished into the fog. I searched the square, heart pounding, but there was nothing. Only empty streets and the distant cry of gulls. I kept the bird. A year later, I left that city. Took a bus to somewhere nobody knew my name. Slept in shelters. Worked whatever job I could get my hands on. Waitress, cleaner, factory line. Some nights I thought about throwing the bird away. Part of me was scared of it. Like it meant I owed something. Like it tethered me to a world I wanted to forget. But I kept it. And over time, I found other ghosts. A boy in a parking lot with bruises on his face. A woman crying on a bus stop bench. An old man who didn't remember where he lived. I helped when I could. A sandwich. A phone call. A clean blanket. Not because I'm a saint. I'm not. Because once, when I was 17 and invisible, a stranger carried my weight. 10 years later, I came back to the city. The market was different. Brighter, cleaner. New paint. Trendy cafes. But the fountain was still there. And sitting on the same bench was a figure in a long, tattered coat. I froze. It couldn't be him. He'd been old then. This man's back was straighter. Hair darker. But the eyes, those same restless, horizon-chasing eyes, found mine. He smiled. I crossed the square, pulse thundering. When I reached him, he spoke first. You kept it. I pulled the wooden bird from my pocket, its surface worn smooth. His smile widened. Good. I sat beside him. And for the first time in years, I told someone the truth about who I was. What I'd done. The nights I failed to help. The times I looked away. He listened. When I finished, he handed me another bird. This one newer. Freshly carved. For the next one, he said. I held it tight. Who are you? I whispered. He chuckled. Just someone carrying the weight until someone else is ready. Then he stood. And was gone. This time, I didn't chase him. Because I understood. Some people aren't meant to stay. They pass through your life like lightning through a storm. And the mark they leave isn't a scar. It's a compass. Now I'm 40. I run a shelter 3 blocks from that market. Most nights, it's more than full. Drunks, runaways, women with eyes like dead glass. And every one of them carries a weight too heavy for one heart. I help when I can. Sometimes, when a storm rolls in and the wind rattles the windows, I find a carved bird left on the step. I don't know how, but I keep them. A quiet promise in wood and grain. And on nights when the world feels like too much, I sit by the fire, thumb tracing the curves of those tiny wings. And I remember the old man who once told a hungry 17-year-old girl that ghosts don't have to stay dead. That weight can be shared. And that the smallest kindness can outlive even the longest grief.